yeah, follow your heart. And if your heart's saying, I'm meant to be an artist, make sure you just get everybody you love on board. And if they don't come on board at some point, you've got to, it's always a lonely decision to decide to do something risky. But that's the way every good decision, every risky decision is. And anyone who's ever succeeded in doing that, it's because they set this, if they did it and preserved their relationships, it's because they set the stage, in a right way, and then took the leap. Put yourself on the spot and narrow down to one thing that you want to do. And for me, it was plein air painting was the thing that I needed to focus on. And once you have that in your head, it's very freeing. It's like, oh, okay, that's what I need to focus on. And you start to align your future in such a way that, that it's going to point towards that thing.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold brush. My name is Laura Orengo-Bear, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips, specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. On today's episode, we sat down with John Lasater, a realist painter with a deep love for plein air. We discussed John's artistic journey from his previous career as a graphic designer to discovering his passion for painting to overcoming challenges and finding his unique voice. We also discussed the spiritual and emotional aspects of art, emphasizing the importance of connection, authenticity, and continuous learning. John also shares insights into his artistic influences, techniques, and approach to painting landscapes and portraits, including the use of memory and imagination. We also talked about the value of art history and studying the work of the masters, as well as the importance of developing one's own style and vision by continuously asking yourself, what do you truly love? John also provides advice for those seeking to pursue a career in art, emphasizing the need for determination, risk-taking, and aligning one's lifestyle with one's passions. Finally, John tells us about his upcoming workshops and his Facebook group community. Welcome, John, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
Hey, doing great. Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it. Yep, doing good.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'm excited to have you because, as I was telling you before, I think your work is beautiful. Your colors have this vibration in them, especially your canyon paintings. I can't stop looking at them. They're like eye candy to me. And then the portraits that you're doing recently, I love them. I can feel like there's a bit of a synergy going on too. I feel like it's very hard for someone to do both landscape and figure. And when you can do both, it's like, oof, that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think it's landscape that maybe is the most intimidating for people. And there's the biggest learning curve maybe with that. So at one point when I realized my drawing skills were where they needed to be to do still life and portrait, it lost its challenge at that point, or I just didn't know what to do with everything else, let's say, like the color or the environment that the portraits are in. And so I realized that my biggest learning curve is going to be in landscape at that point. And even now, if you ask me what my favorite painting is, it's not a landscape.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, of my own paintings. Like I did that to some friends this year. I said, "What's your favorite painting?" And one of them, it was a bowl of plums, and the other was something very odd. And then for me, it was a painting I did of a iris on my fence row at home. And
Wow.
I guess that's not a landscape. It was more of a still life, really. So something's more special about those paintings of an object, and it's centered right in the middle of the canvas. And yeah.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
So I guess I'm still trying to figure out what the ultimate landscape is for me.
Oh, yeah, you might have to go out further out in nature to see what there might be out there because the earth has so many varied landscapes. But yeah, that's very interesting. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier about how you like that, those objects have some substance. And there's a bit of a challenge with you were mentioning like air, like painting air.
Yeah, that's right. It was Leonard Anderson that put it that way, that like painting a landscape is like painting a box of air. And once I heard that line, I just noticed it everywhere, and I realized, oh my gosh, as I look at the landscape, it's always a hallway that's kind of descending into some vanishing point. Um, and you know, even if you put a tree right in the middle of the painting, it's enveloped in this hallway. And at least when you're down on the ground, you know, sometimes you can get a better perspective up high
Mhm.
and see everything in a different way. But yeah. So the big challenge is how you make that hallway uh, have the right kind of atmospheric distance and make it maybe original in some way, or you know, kind of out of the ordinary. So
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. But before we continue, actually, I wanted to ask you if you mind telling us a bit about you, actually, you know, who you are and also what you do, which now we can understand it's landscape mostly, but you do a little bit of everything. So do you mind telling us some more?
yeah, I guess as a young man, I was misdirected to some degree. I knew I enjoyed being creative. I had a few drawing lessons as a young man, and um, I just didn't see a future in it. And maybe the world's changed enough, you know, um, that young people can see a vision for that, and parents also encourage it, right? So to be creative, and the world's definitely changing quick. So um, yeah, I began to, I guess, get more visually excited as I got older, and you know, started painting at age 30. So I really probably missed out on some training that I could have had earlier on, but I'm really glad that it's actually made me feel young, that I've been able to discover something and get excellent at it, or as excellent as I am at this point anyway. Um, you know, and I'm 53 now and very excited about the future still. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of who I am and where I came from, and um,
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I don't think, you know what? It is never too late. I actually recently interviewed a woman who started painting at like age 50, and she loves it and she's doing great also. I mean, it just, you know, it's like I said, it's never too late. It what matters is also that you love it and that you're doing something that makes you excited to get up in the morning
mhm,
and you're successful at it too. So
yeah, yeah,
obviously, you know, with painting, it's a very long journey because there's always something more to learn. There's always something more to capture, and the more you know, the less you know. You get me? Like it's very like
mhm.
inverse.
That's really true. Yeah, actually, I think that's an excellent point that should encourage everyone. Is that from the start, um, if you're able to apply yourself in a way that there's humility, your work is already beautiful.
Mm,
And so like you can get so excellent that you quit looking at life and you quit learning. And there's a downward curve at that point, I would say. And wasn't it Picasso that pointed that out, that he was aiming to become more of a kid, you know, at some point he was too adult and he wanted to like become more childlike, you know, so that's more of it like you're heading downhill now or going backwards to where you were when you were young. And so um yeah, I think anyone that's just starting out or has only been learning a year or two should never feel discouraged about being in that place, you know. And 90% of my students would give up if they thought um, that it was too late, you know, because
yeah.
many of them are past retirement and just want to participate in this, you know, millennia old tradition that is just wonderful to be a part of. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you call it millennial old because it is one of the oldest artistries, truly. Like
mm,
our super distant ancestors did it, and they did it, you know. Also, I I feel for the same purpose, you know, to understand the world around them and to document and because it just comes naturally. It's like I don't know. I
mhm.
feel like
Yeah,
as kids we see a wall and we have a crayon and we just want to do something on it. You
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Mhm.
That's what walls were
um,
meant for.
yes, they're meant to be drawn on. But then
Yeah.
also I
I need
wanted
to
to
draw on
ask
these,
you.
by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah, those walls are aching for
They are
something on them. Yeah. And by the way, because I'm very curious, because I did kind of read a bit of an interview that you had about a certain voice that you heard, but I
Mhm.
want you to tell us a bit more of the story of what was that moment where you were like, I'm gonna pursue fine art full time now.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I guess at some point there was a dark moment of the soul in my 20s where I needed to figure out whether I even believe in God or not. And
Mhm.
um, I put him to the test and just asked for him to direct my life in a way that would be more satisfying. Um, because otherwise I was going to give up and just follow all of my hedonistic pleasures and
Mm,
do whatever I felt like. And I was already a dad at the time, and so
mm,
like everything was telling me I shouldn't. But
mhm,
yeah, there's a dark part of me that I needed to face. And so yeah,
mhm,
just giving him that opportunity very quickly started seeing some things change in my life, and uh, it actually is the impetus that got me into graphic design, because you were aware of that I was in graphic design for a while, and that already was so exciting. I any angst over being creative was gone at that moment. So I did that for about 10 years, but I was only doing it about a year and a half before I found painting, and a friend of mine introduced me to it. His name's Todd Williams. Um, and then I began attending like painting seminars and workshops. And after about 10 years of graphic design, I had become so enamored with painting that I was really excited about getting away from the computer screen. I felt like it was hurting my eyes, and I wanted to be in nature. I wanted an excuse to see the world. So um, I I had done a few plein air events and could see the potential there for possibly providing for my family. And so went to God again and just said, you know what I want. And I believe that you planted that desire, and I want to experience um, just again, your father nature. And so, um, yeah, it wasn't long, maybe 2 or 3 years that I was eagerly praying about that. And then um, one day I heard him say, "You gotta you gotta worry about people that actually hear him." But here I am. I heard him, and he said, "At any moment, when you're ready, you can do it." And I went,
wow.
"Whoa!" And then all of a sudden, I became scared because I still had strong voices in my life, my parents and my wife's parents that or making sure I take care of the family and take care of my wife. And of course, my wife was worried about the thought too. But I, it was actually really good because it made me to kind of settle into where I was, and I knew at least that moment was coming at some point. So I was settled for a while. Went to an event with a friend, and he and I had a few drinks one night, and I was just like, I just want to quit my job. I just want to do it. I'm just ready. I'm just so ready, And like it became a real tearful conversation with him because he jumped ship. I didn't say that right. About three years before that, left the commercial world and was painting full time, and went home that night and fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night and sat up. And it was really strange because I never do this, but the room felt quiet. Like it was just completely quiet in the room. And I'm like, what's going on? And just a heaviness or just something, a weighty feeling came over me, and I heard, it's time. Oh, I'm getting emotional. Um,
Okay.
yeah. um, and yeah, I just went back to sleep, and the next morning my wife rolled over in bed and said, what happened? you know
Mhm.
she knew something had happened, and I was like, that is so cool. um
Yeah.
yeah, God told me it's time. And she said okay. She was still scared of the idea, and went into work and just said, in 2 months I need out of here. And so that's the way it went down. And immediately from the moment I went back home, I had freelance graphic design work waiting for me from that
Mhm.
business, and um, I started scheduling plein air events and did it well enough at those events that I was able to begin seeing some future in that. And I was totally unprepared. I was a business major in college, so I should have known better than to not have better preparation. But I guess I don't know. God made me crazy enough to not worry about, like, I just don't care about money
Mhm.
until it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had plenty of those moments over the past 15, 20 years, and it's been 20 years. Um, so,
Um,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's been a wild ride. And I mean, I think the lesson out of that is, um, give the creator a chance. And uh, I think he wants to show himself as real if you want to know if he's real. And so, that's the only message that I see in that, I suppose. And he's become undeniable. And so I guess I'm a Jesus freak now. So
Oh man. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like it's definitely been a turning point for you, a precious moment for you, and I'm very grateful that
yeah,
you shared that with us because it
yeah.
really is. I sometimes feel that that divinity, it wants to work through us, right? It wants to express through us, and I feel like people like us who are artists, we definitely are good, candidates for that, good vessels for that,
Hmm.
to see the beauty that is in the world around us that so many people miss out on or don't notice because they're too busy,
Yeah,
stuck in their daily rut. So
yeah.
yeah, I completely, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not
Well said.
particularly a Jesus freak, but I do feel, I do feel that divinity whenever I
Mhm.
paint as well.
Yeah,
That there's
yeah,
something. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I believe he's faithful to show whatever he wants us to follow. So
Yes.
as long as we acknowledge him, or at least try.
Yeah, yeah, acknowledge that there's something greater than us for sure, which I
There
mean
you go.
nature is the biggest
Yeah,
indicator of that as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's kind of counter to materialism. But I've noticed that materialists can be very miserable people, and so no wonder they feel that way. Go and
Yeah.
find your art. Science is good, but find something that
Mhm.
really motivates you, that takes part in magnifying beauty and magnifying the world around us,
Mhm.
and saying, by that you say it has value, and
Mhm.
that makes you want to live life more. And so it has this um, watershed, I guess, effect
Yeah.
that is a good thing for us. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and I feel also there's that feeling of connection. I think when you're too much in the materialistic view of the world, it can become very disenchanting and very disconnected because you see
Yeah.
everything as individual.
Hmm.
But when you do see, beyond that, right? For example, like a tree isn't just a tree, it has roots and the roots
Hmm.
touch the earth and the earth touches everything around it. It's everything is connected. And
Wow.
remembering that is so important
Yeah.
because even the trees, right? The birds
Yeah.
nest in the trees provide pollen. And they also have more trees with other trees, and they provide fruit as well. There's a whole ecosystem around the
Yes.
whole universe.
That is
Um,
so well said. And it can't be overstated. It sounds sappy, but it's real.
It
And you
is,
really
yeah.
see it as an artist. Like, you see the way colors connect, even. The color of the
Mm,
ground moves up into the tree.
yeah.
And so there's a visual, you see the visual connectedness. There's roots, probably from learning from science,
Mhm.
but um you see that connectedness, the way things want to move into one another. And
Yes.
it's a lovely thought. It really is. And it motivates beauty in music, let's say, or um, like, notes can't just be harsh. They have to, like,
Mhm.
flow into one another in a way that carries you along and connects the whole thing together as one song, right? And it's the same
Right.
with a painting. So
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a symphony. Paintings are a
mhm,
symphony of color.
mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Wow.
even the
And
lines, you could even say in drawing, you see that connectedness as well. So in
yeah,
values, so
exactly. Yeah, because especially with painting, like you're saying, you're not just painting like a person, right? You also need
mhm,
to paint the background. and it has to make sense with the person. They have to exist within their environment. They aren't just a little sticker, right? You can't paint someone as just a sticker. But in the realism world, right, we want to involve them in the ambiance, in the environment. Like you were saying, bring it back to that painting of air, right? Painting the air. There's not a single moment when we're not touching the air or the ground, right? Or at least something that's touching the ground, like that. There's that
Yep.
connectedness again. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
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 And so that's kind of a metaphor for the spiritual world too, hopefully. And
Mhm.
we kind of feel it, and so
Yeah. Yeah.
good.
Especially as artists, like I said, we're very sensitive. But
Hmm.
then I also wanted to know, because I saw on your Instagram that you've been doing a few copies or a few, explorations, right?
Hmm.
And I saw that you also really like Corot, which I love Corot. He's amazing. Uh, I wanted to know who your influences are in your paintings.
Well, that's a great thing to talk about because I think at some point I became unsatisfied looking at my peers and just going to plein air events and just looking at nature. And it seemed like there's got to be another teacher here. It can't just be what I'm already seeing and trying to compete against, so to speak. And I mean, in competition, it's like who can be more original, not just competing for money or
Yeah.
prizes. So, I actually got to go study with Israel Hirschberg in Italy, and he did a great job of lashing me up and down about the fact that I didn't really understand art history. I knew the ones I'd been taught through workshops, which was John Singer Sargent, Sorolla. Those were the only names I had ever heard, pretty much.
Mhm.
And it seemed like everybody was aiming to be one of those two artists.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
that was just in the small culture, the world that I was in. Um, and so Israel, he said, "You're here in Italy. You need to widen and expand what you understand and what you need to understand this tradition you're coming from." Because he said, it's like if you were a cellist, let's say, and you started playing your own songs, and then you got up on a stage and you started playing these songs that you had written, but you never learned Bach or Mozart or any of the greats, then you're kind of doing a disservice to history. And I was like, wow, that's really profound thought. And so I came back very affected by that, and of course affected by everything I had seen. I mean, for instance, I went to Siena and I went into the Duomo and I went into the museum, and then I went back to the bus. And he said, "Did you go see the good and bad government painting?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "You missed that one. That's why I brought you here." And he lashed me up and down about that one. And I went so I had to learn about the good and bad government painting
Mhm.
from the internet. So anyway, if I were to go back, I have a much better understanding and would really soak it up much better than I did. But I would say after learning from Israel Hirschberg, I did go to the Louvre and I went to the Orsay and got a really good education from those museums and from the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands. So yeah, anyway, at least in Western art history,
Mhm.
and spent a lot of time in study. And so the study has deeply affected me. And now that I look back and read books, for instance, I'm reading Da Vinci's notes, and even he said it's better to imitate the antique than modern work. Um, I'm reading here. But painting declines and deteriorates from age to age when painters have no other standard than painting already done. And then he pointed out how the Romans, had a look, and they never looked outside of what they did. But he was pointing out that was an example of originality never came out of that because they never looked backwards very far. So anyway, I I think if Da Vinci said it, that's probably something to pay attention to.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
It was very wise. Very wise.
But like I definitely like Corot, and I was introduced to him mostly through Israel Hirschberg.
Hmm.
Um, and as I look at Corot's work that he did once he returned to France, though, I don't like it as much. So whatever he did from plein air in Italy, wow, it's just brilliant. And also the
Hmm.
way he applied the paint was very sketchy, and
Yeah.
so that's an aesthetic we all appreciate now, and he didn't at the time. He didn't think that was going to have any value, but very quickly it did. The Impressionists actually started to try to mimic his sketchy sketches, and
Hmm.
they even started collecting them. Like Degas owned one of my favorites of Corot's.
Yeah.
So Degas is another influence that I appreciate. A lot of French painters, Pissarro, Ingres, and Braque. I like Georges Braque. Is he French? I think he is.
Maybe.
Or he might be Swiss or something.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good group. I definitely see the impressionist influence in your work for
Hmm.
sure. The manners with Ong, especially with your recent portrait, which I absolutely love. The portrait that you have. It's behind you right now for our listeners. You can check it out in the video or on John's Instagram because it's there as well. Gorgeous,
Thank
gorgeous.
you. Thank you.
You're
And I
welcome.
don't want to leave out American influences. I
Hmm.
love what
Yeah.
Whistler and Degas, both of them actually were this great bridge between neoclassicism and impressionism. And
Mm.
they kind of carried with them a love of history and a love of those periods of painting. And even, before that, of course, Whistler was a big fan of Velázquez. And so,
Mm.
I don't know, I think that showed the kind of broad appreciation that I hoped to have. And I love what they did with it. They were both Degas and Whistler would. It seemed like their paintings were always in a perpetual state of unfinishedness. And so
Yeah.
if I could be willing to do that and not always take the painting right to the edge
Mm.
immediately,
Mhm.
but work in the parts that are important and kind of see how long I can keep it in that that state, the better the painting ends up being to me. So yeah.
Yeah, there's value in every layer of the painting, right? I mean, even down to the imprimatura, right, where we just put like one color in the background to work on top of. It's still useful, right?
Hmm.
So I totally understand that. It can be so hard to leave it uncovered because it feels
Yes.
like, ooh, it feels like I need to fill this in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah, and
another one of
sometimes
those
like if you
lessons.
wait and then you fill in like a corner that you had left undone,
Mhm.
there's a really like just an elated feeling that comes from that. Like it's like, oh, it's done. Like
Yeah.
it was waiting for that moment to finally finish that edge or to put this there or that there. And how many times have
Mhm.
I painted to the edge way too soon? And it was frustrating that I had that
Mhm.
out there. And so like I'd much rather do that at the right moment, and
Yeah.
um, you could relate
Yeah.
that back to music. You can think of even the process of painting as a song, like that you want to enjoy. You want to enjoy the song, and it has a climax and it has a good finish. So
Mhm.
there's other American painters that I like from the 20th century, and it would be that whole, I guess, New York uh, sort of flat, plain painting. I don't know what to call
Mhm.
it. I guess nowadays they call it perceptual painting, but
Mhm.
it was Lois Dodd and Fairfield Porter. Um, there's others that aren't coming to mind right now, but yeah, I really like looking at their work, and I'm just like, that was a real appropriate Edward Hopper, real
Yeah.
appropriate sort of new American look that still embraced representational painting, and so I think of them as almost heroes that they carried on that tradition, but in a modern way, and it really seems to fit the art for art's sake
Mhm.
thing that the Bohemian artists, kind of handed down to us. And I don't like where art went in certain periods, but I definitely love how they handled the visual world. And yeah, so I guess that's maybe as far as I go with modern art, except I do like, I like some of the expressionism, um, like Franz Klein. I think
Mhm.
I could totally enjoy his paintings all around my house. The black and
Mhm.
white series that he did, to me, that's really cool because it's like he was trying to connect to the visual world and he was trying to do these gestures that are very childlike and playful that might look like something or might not, and just
Mhm.
filling the rectangular canvas in such a way um, that it has enough substance and beauty to it just by the marks or the shapes. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's something in everything that draws us in, right? I mean,
mhm.
for example, like back to music, like there might be a type of music you don't like, but maybe there's like a song in that genre that maybe does draw you in, and there's something about it. And I find that most of the times, like there are those certain pieces and those certain like with paintings or with music that they reflect something to
Mm.
us about ourselves also, which is why
Mhm,
we're drawn
mhm.
to them. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's faso.com/podcast.
Yeah.
And actually, that segues really nicely into my next question, surprisingly, which is how have you found your voice? And then what advice would you give to someone who's trying to find their artistic voice?
Yeah, so I think I've probably shared this in other interviews, but as a teacher, I'm also teach quite a bit. Um, I think of three teachers that help us become self-taught. One is nature itself, which is where we start, really. It's like when you're a child, you're trying to mimic things you've seen, and they're filtering through you. You can't help that. But so nature is a great teacher. And then our history is a great teacher. And and so I think you need to really look and develop those role models. And I would say from history, like, yeah, you can have a modern teacher, you can have a contemporary teacher that you put yourself under, but if they're a good teacher, they're pointing you back to their influences. And so at some point you need to come to terms with that. Once you've tried your hand at painting and want to do something excellent and worthy, then go back and look at great painters and choose 8 to 10 that that you connect with, I guess, or that you think you'd like to aim for. And I think in mimicking them, you begin to find who you are because you were drawn to them in the first place, hopefully out of the purity of your own desires. So that's the second teacher is art history, and then the third is your imagination, and that the filtering through us, you can't help but integrate some imagination when you're looking at something and trying to translate it. But even more so, I would say, be very childlike in the way you put it on and use your imagination to try to remember what it was you saw, rather than just seeing yourself as just, I think Dickinson used to teach that you're taking in data through your eyes and you want it to bypass the mind and go straight into the arm to the canvas. And that's kind of cool, to try. But at the same time, the messed up things that happen in your mind are kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
Like the
Yes.
modern world appreciates that. And
Yes.
so yeah, let those things you see get messed up and and bring yourself to be able to leave it that way. So I think it was Robert Henry said at the beginning of the Art Spirit that he wished he could start an art school that had 3 levels. This
Mhm.
adage that he came out with. He said he wanted, the model on the first floor. He wanted the beginner students to have to go up to the third floor to paint or to draw, and he wanted the more advanced students to be on the second floor. And so they would have to come down to the first floor and look at the model and then run up to their their easel. And he wanted those beginner students to get worn out going up to the second floor. And so they quit coming back down so much to look. And I
Mhm.
think that's actually pretty neat. So it gets you to commit to memory what you think you're seeing, and what comes out of that hopefully is more beautiful and more human and not so perfectionistic. So
Oh my gosh. That is, yes. I love that because I actually recently mentioned this to someone that I think memory is the most underrated part of painting. Like, I think so many people get very caught up in, and I think also because of the camera, because we've been spoiled with the ease of having cameras, and just being able to photograph things and okay, I got it. But that, with memory, having to commit yourself to understand something, to look at a figure and remember, okay, this is what's going on here, and then having to completely go somewhere else to figure it out. Oof, that's amazing.
yeah. And your originality shows up in what you ignore, actually. So, like,
Yes.
I mean, I remember painting a figure that had their arms crossed in their lap or something like that. And I think probably in the lighting that they were in, the arms were disappearing somewhat into the fabric. And
Mhm,
so I didn't pay attention. I was thinking of everything around them that made their head look right or their legs or whatever. And I recall having that experience as I was teaching my students to try to paint from memory. And I was like,
mhm,
well, I don't even remember what the arms look like, but I'm going to go ahead and just paint skin tone in there, let's say, but without any form or a remembrance of what the lines look like
mm,
or anything.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it turned out a more appropriate, let's say, you know, re-envisioning of what was going on in that area
mhm.
than if I had really noticed all the contour lines and done them just right.
Yeah, yeah, it's more fleeting, a bit more like natural. And
Mhm.
interestingly, in the academies, there was this teacher. He has a very long French name, but he wrote a book on the practice of memory in drawing. I think that's the title of the book. And the final exam he would give his students was actually something similar to the writer of the Art Spirit. He would force them to go into the Louvre, look at a
Mhm.
painting, and then go home and paint it from memory only, the whole painting.
Wow.
And the results, because in the book you can see the images of the students' work, it was so close. It was like, I wanna say 90
Huh.
to 99% accurate to the painting that they were copying. Down
Wow.
to, like, I remember one of them had, like, a rug or something,
Yeah,
and the rug had a pattern. The guy got it, or whoever painted it, they got it, and I was like,
that's
"Oh,
incredible.
imagine memerizing all of that." Yeah, but
Maybe
yeah,
he
memory.
misunderstood the point of the exercise. Because some people would have a more visual memory. Like my
Yes.
daughter, I have a daughter that when she was 5 or 7, I remember her
Mhm.
going, I'm gonna remember this. She'd go with her eyes.
Aw, cute.
And she literally could remember a moment that way. She would file it
That's
away
awesome.
as like a
Yeah.
camera shot with her eyes. And
Oh,
some
that's
people just
awesome.
have that ability. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
but
but
the
yeah,
point of the exercise, I would say,
mhm.
actually is to notice the things that you don't notice. It's like
Yes.
that tells you a lot about who you are and what
Mhm.
matters to you. It might
Mhm.
even be scary. It might show you something about yourself you don't like, like,
Ye yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I often
What do we
tell
pay attention to? That's the question.
yes. Yeah, and I often tell friends who are curious about painting or struggling with painting, I say, yeah, I mean, when you're painting, you're facing your demons sometimes. You have to face the fact that maybe you don't see things as they are. Obviously, we see things as we are. But trying to get more and more objective can be really challenging because it's almost like we're fighting our own brain or our own lived experience that may or may not be objective. So that's that other layer of challenge when it comes to painting. But when you use it right, that's what really helps you play around with how you visualize the world, how you see the world, and you translate it on the canvas. Like how you were saying with that
Mhm.
imagination, going from the eye into the brain and not bypassing it out the hand. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, that's really great. And then now I really want to talk about a bit more about marketing. And I wanted to ask you, what has been the most useful sales tool for you?
Well, I mean, FASO has been great. I know you
Mhm.
want me to say that, and they have.
Well, you can say it if you really feel it.
I do. I
Okay.
do. Actually, I have really enjoyed being on. I was a very independent person at the time they came to me and suggested I get a website with FASO, and I've really come to appreciate the ability to have an e-commerce side to it, and so I've been using it. I try to hide it. I kind of make little galleries for just a select group of people, and then I'll try to sell to those people. And so it's been nice to have that functionality.
Mhm.
Um, so that's been great actually, and I have sold quite a few through the website. So very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I have never been that acceptable to galleries. I
Mm.
think because I cannot bring myself to repeat very often, and so um, it's like I'm just trying to paint everything in the world at least once. You know what I mean? It just seems I don't know where that part of my personality came from. Um, so uh, yeah, I haven't found a home in the gallery world so much. And I tried early on and I've quit trying because it would be useless to get into great galleries unless they really wanted to represent me and were excited
Mhm.
about that. So I've kind of put that on the shelf. I'll be okay with that someday if somebody comes to me and wants to represent. Right now, I let just regional galleries represent me, and many of them would be laughable to my peers, but
Oh,
I've sold through those places just fine.
yeah.
And so there's not a whole lot of prestige maybe in some of them, but it's really fun. Like one lady that lives in the middle of nowhere that's a potter and a sculptor, she she has my work in her house. And she has groups of people that come and she'll serve them a meal and she'll walk them around the house and show them some of the paintings she has. And I've sold through there quite a bit. Uh, so that's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, you need to look that lady up. Her name's Ingrid, and PBS did a special about her. They did a movie. It was they have a show called Deep South, I think it is, or something like
Mhm.
that. And they did an episode called Ingrid, and it's about an hour and a half uh, movie on her life. And it's so interesting. It's just terribly interesting. She's like a feminist dream because she even left her family at one point and just went to the middle of nowhere to become who she is. And, um, she's very honest about those parts of her life, and they're just beautiful. So yeah, very good movie. But
Yeah.
so I'm honored to be associated with her, but it's not a prestigious gallery, I would say,
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess it's just been getting to know my collectors has been the greatest marketing technique for me. I do enjoy people, and so going to plein air events, exposing myself to lots of people seeing me outdoors painting, um, doing well at those events. So continuing to go and go and go, so that once in a while I'd win something or um, that's opened up a world of collectors to me, and so those become your best followers So you almost need to meet the people, and then they see that they like things about you, and you connect through conversation. And then when they start following you on Instagram and Facebook, they have they already have that background with you, and so you'll get a lot of sales that way.
Mm.
And so that's really exciting when somebody that I met 12 years ago, that's been following me all 12 years, comes to me for a commission, or says, it's been 10 years since I bought a painting from you, and now I want to buy one. And so a lot of those will just pop out of the woodwork. There's other streams of income for a self-employed person, and I know a lot of friends have started making prints and other ancillary products, but um, I avoid that. Like I'm not interested in that at all. But I love teaching, and so once I started finding teaching, there's all kinds of ways to make little streams of income as a teacher, and we're all becoming aware of that very quickly. Um, I think it was Patrick Okrasinski or something like that.
Yeah.
I was just on his
It's
Instagram
prolific.
page the other day and realized he's got this link tree with all kinds of opportunities that you can learn from him, and that's a probably smart way of doing it. I'm gonna let him have it though, because I'm more into teaching regionally now, and I really love face-to-face teaching. And so I live in the most dry part of the United States for doing that kind of thing, and I can still make a pretty decent stream of income through that. So there's hope for anyone, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, that there's hope for anyone because we all have different personalities. We all have different ways that we like to interact with the world. And you seem like, for what you mentioned, you really, really prefer in person or, close by and that works. I mean, you're able to make a living with, these regional galleries and, this whole prestige thing that's whatever. What matters is that you're doing what you love and that you're selling and there are people who are buying these pieces who are enjoying them so much that they
Mm,
come back to you for more, 10 years later like you
mhm,
said. I think that's one of the beautiful parts about being a painter is
mm,
it's not just the prestige, it's also the actual connection with people, which is
mhm,
it brings back to what we were saying about spirituality. It's a way of connecting with others in a very authentic way. And the
yeah,
people who love your work, they resonate with you, right? They
mhm,
resonate
that's
and
right.
they match in a way, and
Mhm,
that's why they come back.
yeah, right on.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you, what has been the greatest challenge that you've overcome in your career, business wise with your artwork?
Good question. Greatest challenge really has just been making it through the dry times.
Mhm,
It's easy to be a painter when things are really rolling, but there's usually seasons in every year where I've got to push through, and there's also seasons that are 2 or 3 years long. Like I would say, COVID probably taught us all that. And so
mhm,
there are big waves in going on in the timeline that um, we're hopeless to predict.
mm. Yeah.
So I would just say the motivation is extremely important. And so um, in being authentic with yourself. Yeah, so I think it's really important to know who you are. Begin writing and kind of formulating your thoughts in such a way that you can defend who you are. Let's just imagine that in 5 days you have to face an interview like this, or you have to face a curator that's going to ask you, why should I look at your work and see any validity in it? And that's a discouraging thing to face for probably a lot of people. But if you will just subject yourself to that and say, well, I probably should try to find that out.
Yeah.
Um, and it really causes you to face it, and to maybe see where the flaws are in your thinking, or just areas that maybe it would be better to try to figure out. And I don't know. I'm sure it's really painful. I faced that when Israel Hertzberg asked me, whether I knew art history or not, and I figured out I was a completely different painter than I thought I was because of doing that. That is strange, isn't it? So
Yeah.
you think that, so I would say a lot of artists think that John Singer Sargent is the painter they should aim for.
Mhm, mhm.
But it's because they've only been painting for 3 to 5 years. They went to some workshops where they learned that name. They started looking at his art and saying, well, yeah, that's pretty dang good. And what they don't realize is it's perfect. Like you're aiming for perfection and you're never going to hit it. So who are you really?
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, who are you really? Who are you going to, and learn to appreciate maybe some of the more human painters that that were never satisfied with what they did. That's why I love Degas. It's 'cause you can just tell this guy, he wasn't a, he wasn't a master draftsman from the start. As I recall, his peers even commented on that about him, that early on he just wasn't that great of a draftsman. And so, he had to grow in those areas, and but in the growing, I think he never was satisfied. And so um I don't even remember what your question was, but here we are.
Biggest challenge. Biggest challenge.
Challenge. So yeah, the challenge has just been facing those those really deep questions. And
Yeah.
I would say now, come hell or high water, I am prepared for the future because I know who I am and I know what I want to do every day. And um, I would even be willing to be poor and live in a tent in order to do this because I feel a sense of calling to it as well. But um, if times get rough, hey, I'm printing gold here. I could paint a 9 by 12 and sell it to somebody for $50. Even at my worst, I could at least probably get that out of somebody. And well, if I did 10 of those a day, that's a pretty good living. So, the potential is always there. And
Mhm.
people need beauty at the hard times too. And so I think it would always be possible to sell paintings to people. But at
Wow.
what price point is the question. So
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's very inspiring. Definitely I do agree,
mhm,
when you're learning how to paint and you're trying to move forward with your work, it is a challenge, learning to get to know yourself instead of, letting yourself get caught up in other people's vision, right? Like
mhm.
Sargent. I love that you mentioned Sargent because I know so many people who mention him. And I like Sargent. I like his work, but it isn't
I do.
necessarily what I would aim for. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, his work is gorgeous.
Yeah,
Same with Velasquez. I know so many people who, oh my God, Velasquez this, Velasquez that. I'm like, yeah, but that's like, ooh. I mean, how many people can really reach that? And then also,
well, Sargent was aiming to be Velasquez.
yeah, exactly. And it came out a totally different way. So instead of like looking at him, I often think also like maybe looking at the person that they're looking at, right? If I look at someone and they're looking at someone else, why don't I just look at their source as well? Because that also brings interest, but also only if I'm truly drawn to it. Because I think we get so pulled into like oh, the technique is amazing that we miss out on the more, I guess, like creative side of
Mhm.
painting. And I
Yeah,
totally agree. Knowing how to talk about your work
yeah,
and really figuring
yeah,
out
yeah.
where you want to go and your vision, not like
Mhm.
Soroya's vision or Sargent's vision or Velasquez's vision. It's your vision too.
Yeah, yeah.
And your unique voice in the world because you
Mhm.
don't want to just paint like someone else, right? That's why I like that you mentioned, having like 8 to 10 artists that you look at in art
Mhm.
history. It gives you that breadth and they all
Mhm.
show you different things and you have to,
Yeah.
I guess, mix it all in and try to figure out, what comes out and what comes out is
Mhm.
you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if those 8 to 10 are somewhat diverse. I think that's important too.
Mhm, mhm.
I think
Definitely.
everyone should probably have a Renaissance or maybe Mughals from India or some sort of source like that was from that period.
Mhm.
Um, because they taught us so much about geometry and uh, uh, I guess the dispersion of color in such a way that it was beautiful but also harmonious, that kind of thing. Um, and so there's various periods that you should probably dip into, but find the one that you connect to the most. And
Yes.
Some artists are just too similar. Like if you say Titian, Velasquez, um, and John Singer Sargent, you're talking
Mhm.
about three very perfect painters. No, Velasquez was more human, I would say. I love that
Yeah.
that he wasn't just doing society portraits, but um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
he
I think
definitely
that
followed.
those three are so similar that maybe you should add a few more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely from different time periods. I like that you mentioned that. Yeah, because it's easy to get caught up in like one little piece of history, and all of those people were looking at each other too. So I
mhm,
actually heard
right.
recently that instead of looking at an artist as an individual, it's better to look at them as a time, like a group of artists who all work together, kind of like the Impressionists. They were all looking at each
Yeah.
other and learning from each other.
Yes.
So it's good to divide up a little bit more,
Yeah.
expand that
Yeah.
influence.
That's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
well said. And plus, Sargent was part of the Impressionist era, and he
Mhm,
was actually trying to mimic the Impressionists many times. And so he was loving what he was seeing, this more crude way of putting the paint on. And probably as a perfectionist, he was, or just having such a great skill set,
mhm.
he was trying to figure out the spirit of art.
Yes.
And like, how do I show a little more spirit in what I do? And so if all you look at is his society portraits where the skill is, what was coming out. And also there was a simplification in the way he painted too that was admirable,
Mhm.
um, but obviously required way more skill than very slow, tight drawing. And so he was also kind of showing off a skill in that simplification as well. So
Yes.
anyway, I think he was aiming to be a little more like the Impressionists,
Mhm.
and so that says something too that's worth noting.
I agree. Yeah, yeah, and in the way he worked also, it's very obvious because I've heard a couple things about how he worked, which is he used to have his studio was huge, so he could step back really, really far away. Because of
Hmm.
course you capture likeness from distance more than
Hmm.
from seeing features. And then also I heard that he used to wipe off the face
Hmm.
often. Like, he never really did it the first time around. He did it
Yeah.
after various times of trying and failing and trying and failing. So that also, gives you a bit of, relief that he didn't
Yes.
actually do it in one go. He hit
Yeah.
the road hard and really tried,
I agree.
to get it. Yeah.
He wanted it to look like a first pass, though,
Yes.
right? He
He
wasn't
did.
embracing
Yes.
layers quite as much, and yeah.
No. Yeah, that's why he would wipe it off completely if it just wasn't working out, and then he'd go for it again and again and again. And I think
Mhm.
that determination that he had is something definitely to
Yeah.
imitate,
Yeah.
not so much the end result of his work, right?
Yeah. And I don't mean to decry him. I just feel like I'm the only voice saying maybe we should think about some other artists.
Oh, no, I totally agree. I'm totally with you. I don't wanna say he's overrated because he isn't. He is wonderful. But there are other really, really beautiful painters out there, that are less well known and that deserve the same merits, of how hard they worked and how beautiful their work was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm totally with you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And by the way, I did want to know also, final piece of advice for someone who really wants to jump into this career full time.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I gave a bit of the story, just how I came to that point, and that must seem very daunting to think that you might have to be dependent on God or whatever. But um, I think there's something to exposing yourself to that kind of humility. Just really, I can't see the future, and um, yeah, I think you should just, at the moment it seems right, do it, and make sure you don't have too many detracting voices there that are stopping you. And so if there's this pragmatic side to you that, well, so you don't ever know that it's not your dad in your head telling you, you should never do that. You got to have 1 year of salary saved up before you ever take a risk like that. Well, you got to get that voice out of your head. I'm sorry. It might be good advice, and it's good advice, but yeah, follow your heart. And if your heart's saying, I'm meant to be an artist, make sure you just get everybody you love on board. And if they don't come on board at some point, you've got to it's always a lonely decision to decide to do something risky. But that's the way every good decision, every risky decision is. And anyone who's ever succeeded in doing that, it's because they set this, if they did it and preserve their relationships, it's because they set the stage, in a right way and then took the leap. And so, a friend of mine named Rich Davis took me through that exercise at one point, and he got me to realize what I wanted to do. And he said, okay, well, then how are you going to do that thing you want to do? So some of us don't even know what we want to do. You're juggling too many ideas. So go through the exercise of put yourself on the spot and narrow down to one thing that you want to do. And for me, it was plein air painting was the thing that I needed to focus on. And once you have that in your head, it's very freeing. It's like, oh, okay, that's what I need to focus on. And you start to align your future in such a way that, that it's going to point towards that thing. And, give it the time it needs to bring people on board. But yeah, I think that's why the Bible discourages getting married at all. Certain parts
I
is
didn't
because,
know that.
well, now you're divided. You have a divided intention, that has to be shared with someone else. And so, if you're married, most people are, they have to, or at least partnered up with somebody, they have to, figure out how to negotiate it. So, but you really always should follow the thing you're supposed to do or want to do really bad, so. And
Yeah.
it really impractical. And so you've got to figure out how to align that also with your desire for lifestyle. And so if your lifestyle requires a lot of money, I'm sorry, you're gonna have a hard time making that jump. It's never a good idea. Don't do it. Don't jump, you know. You have to
Yes.
embrace the ups and the downs. That's gonna come with it. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like that you bring that up because you can still live a good life from this career. Sure, it won't maybe include having like a Ferrari or something. But I find that most artists don't really have an interest in that. Unless maybe they're in the contemporary art world. I feel like people who are more of in our genre of like realism, there's more of a sensitivity to, you know, the slow life more so than the flashy life. At least from my perspective. Listeners can disagree. That's fine. But I think at least, yeah, from my perspective, everyone I've met has been very humble and just happy to even be doing this for a living.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for real.
it's great.
And it changes your perspective on everything,
Mhm,
to be living your
mhm,
life around something you love doing. Wow, it's like everything change, your perspective on, anything that used to occupy your mind now is in that context. And it's
mhm.
just amazing how the world changes and it sort of washes you in a way that um is really good. So
Yeah,
it's worth doing.
definitely.
I'm telling you, it's worth doing. But
Yes.
change your expectations on your lifestyle because you don't know the power of of that love and that aligned life that is so right,
Yeah,
until you do it.
yeah, and it's definitely more fulfilling. I think um it's more fulfilling than any money could ever buy, right? Like
Mm,
money can only take you so far, but what's the point of money if you have a void inside of you that you want to fill with love? Like money
yeah.
can't buy love.
Right. Very good. Very good.
Yes.
It seems like your
Yeah.
life is that way too from some of the things you were telling me ahead of time.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. It's
I can see the aha or the what I'm saying. So
oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Yes. There's something beautiful, like we were saying earlier, about that deeper spiritual connection that's much more fulfilling. Um, that I mean, I would do this for free type of thing, right? Where like
mhm,
I enjoy this so much
mhm,
that I want to give back to the world rather than take. So it's
mhm.
yeah, it's a totally different perspective once you're doing this for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really should do whatever it takes to make it.
Yes.
Um, but there are certain things that you can do that might hurt your conscience a little bit. Like I would be hurting my conscience to do some of the things I've seen my peers doing, but and I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just that they can do it. But I can't bring myself to do certain things. And I don't know where that comes from, but it's just I've tried this and that, and I felt low because I
Yeah.
compromised in that way. And so I don't want that feeling ever again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing to remember too, is it's really good uh, to be aware of your conscience, and yeah,
Yeah.
don't follow it down.
Having
Don't follow everybody's pattern for doing things. So
Yes. Yeah. Having your own set of unique values that align with,
yeah,
your manner of living for sure.
yeah.
I agree. I mean, everyone has their own path and everyone can choose to do as they want. Um, I also, there are things that I definitely wouldn't do either, and that's because they don't align with my values, and that's fine.
Hmm.
But you can do what you can do with what you've got, right? Like with your own values and how you want to live
Yeah.
your life. And you're a good example of that. You're definitely living through how you want to live. And you're happy to take on, the responsibility of what that means as well.
Mm, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Mhm.
And by the way, I know you also have a studio that you like to teach in, but do you also have any upcoming workshops that you want to mention?
Yeah, there's a couple that I would mention. One of them's full. I've got a portrait workshop coming up. Um, but the one that I've got coming up in September 26th through 28th, is what I'm very excited about. I did it last year in this really great space in Tulsa, Oklahoma, big room with high windows, and we're going to do it in my studio this year, and it's developing a large studio landscape. That's the idea, and I think there's a need for it because so many artists have gotten into the whole plein air movement and the smaller size of landscapes. And how do you upsize and how do you do it in a way that you enjoy the process? Because what I discovered being a plein air painter is that I became dependent on the alla prima aspect, and didn't have a language in the studio. So when I get in the studio, it just became a more discouraging experience. Once I had learned all the lessons of what light and shadow and colors do outdoors, um, then at least the skill set in getting the mixing the colors right had come together for me in the studio. But even then, like I just had this need to do it in an immediate sort of way. And when you're doing a 30 by 40, you can't exactly do an immediate approach. You can upsize, you can use a lot of paint. Um, but I was never satisfied with the look of those canvases. So I want people to be able to walk up to a 30 by 40 and have a bit of an adventure. So I needed some realism in there. So to ever achieve a painting like what's behind your head there,
Mhm.
um, it 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 takes a lot of subtraction in the process. So addition of paint, throwing the paint on, and taking it off. And at the end of every session, what I teach is to try to subtract a bit so that when you come back to the painting, there's problems to fix,
Yeah.
but there's also this ability to take it another level of detail, let's say,
Mhm.
or also to correct mistakes that you didn't realize you were getting into. So, eventually you hope to have a painting that's got some thicker passages through it, but yeah, anyway. So like, how do you do that? To watch a painter like me maybe show you, I think that would be very helpful. And what I do is I just open up all kinds of techniques for that, how to scrumble and backtrack in your painting, but to come back into it in a way that's very motivating. And I use a lot of Degas' approach to the canvas in teaching that. Speaking of Degas. So yeah, it's called Developing a Large Studio Landscape. It's 3 days, September 26th through 28th. It's here in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, where I live. So look that up on my website and see if that would be interesting to you. And I could
Yeah,
even help with lodging if you feel you need that. So
that's great. Yeah, and that sounds amazing. Yeah, I've always found it to be a bit of a mystery how landscape painters like you have a plein air piece and then you take that back to the studio and how do you extend it because there's so much more going on in there. So it's wow. I think anyone would get something really great out of that, especially if they want
Cool.
to graduate into bigger canvas. So
Yeah,
nice.
right on.
Yeah.
And then I'm also sorry, the second workshop is the same theme, but it's in Georgia, in Cartersville, Georgia, at the Booth Art Academy, at the Booth Western Art Museum. So that may be better for people regionally. So yep, that's coming up next spring in March. So
Awesome. Yeah, you have a lot of workshops going on also coming up in the future, which of course I think people can find on your website, which do you mind telling us where people can find more of your work?
yeah, so my website is lasaterart.com. That's
Mhm.
LASATERART.com. Or you can follow me on Instagram at John P. Lasater. Also, I've got an online Facebook group community. Okay, I've got a Facebook group, is what I meant to say,
Mhm.
called Views Community of Painters, and anyone's welcome to ask to be on there. And it's been a great community that I've developed out of people that took my workshops, and so I'll get on there and critique once in a while, or um, I use Photoshop and I kind of show a painting and kind of talk about why I like it or what needs work. And I'll show paintings from history and critique on those as well, and just mainly just talk about what I like about the painting. Um,
Mhm.
and then community members will post paintings that they have that they want to know what people think, or so it's really all about inspiration and critique. So I invite anybody to be a part of that.
So yeah, I might join too.
Great.
Yeah.
You'll
Well,
probably add a lot. I would love to
oh,
have you on there.
I would hope. Yeah, yeah, I'll definitely join then. I would hope I can add something. But yeah, thank
Cool.
you so much, John, for giving us some of your time to give us such wonderful inspiration.
Mm.
I'm gonna have this conversation bouncing out of my head for a while, I think.
Thank you. I enjoyed it so much too. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.